So for Human Design Catalyst, July 22nd, 2024, I thought that we would have a discussion on language in human design and how we describe the defined and undefined centers. Because this is something that's come up a number of times. I know you and I have spoken a bit about language and how we language things in human design, Lucita. And this also came up last week in our in-person human design group, which, by the way, we're still, I believe I have it in my calendar. I think we're looking at
The
1 week
30th.
from tomorrow. Yeah, 1 week from tomorrow, we're going to do it at Frenchie's. So that'll be great. And yeah,
Hopefully, it won't rain that day.
I hope it doesn't. Yeah, if it does, then we'll just have to improvise. But in any case, I think the topic for today would be kind of a fun one. So what happened last week in Overlay, we have a few people who are new to human design. Not their very first introduction. I mean, their very first introduction, I think we would start even more basic and more fundamental. But people who've been in it for a couple of weeks learning about it, we've had a man coming to our groups here in Santa Fe, and his wife kind of got into it, and she's been seeing him research and study, so she wanted in on it, and he's been telling her about it. And it was her third week, probably his sixth week. And the questions that were coming up were, how do you describe the difference between defined and undefined solar plexus? He's defined, she's undefined. How do you describe the difference between defined and undefined ajna in each of these centers? And of course, we have keynotes from Ra, but I thought what might even be more enjoyable is just to hear from some of those present how they would describe it, how they would answer this distinction, and then maybe kind of look at how do we describe using categories and summaries without falling into limiting beliefs about these centers. So maybe we'd start with the defined solar plexus versus the undefined. So I have an undefined solar plexus. I know that Rachel has an undefined solar plexus, now also undefined, right? And so Lasita has a defined solar plexus, the 59.6. Lasita, would you like to share anything about it? Would you like to talk about how you experienced your defined solar plexus? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to, but I'd love to hear.
Right, but I am on an update today. By the way, I have this funny sleep disorder or something that makes it much harder for me to be participatory every other week. Maybe I should only come every other week. But okay, so
I enjoy
today,
you being present whether you participate or not, and you never have to participate, but I always enjoy when you do.
okay, well, basically, my feeling is that the really good way to talk about it is to say that if you're talking about a defined center, then we talk about that channel that defines it and what that channel brings because of through its definition. If it's undefined, as far as I'm concerned, it's totally unpredictable because we cannot say what, I mean, we could go into conditioning receptors and what dormant potentials are on that center, and therefore which channels are likely to get switched on, which may make one undefined solar plexus different from another person's undefined solar plexus. So, what would I say about
Well,
my?
I see what you're saying that there's the nuance of the dormant gates, but what you're really saying is that the fundamental is just the unpredictability of when it's undefined. And
Yes,
I've heard you say this before as well, and I really do like that it's sort of a reminder that we don't necessarily know. We can't really predict what that person's going to be like in this way. They may be experiencing a lot of emotions, or they might not be, or the emotions might be one or another. I often talk about the undefined as being receptive and where we bring in awareness because we're receiving activation from other people or from planetary transits. Even that, though, I think we needs to be qualified that someone with a defined solar plexus might take that the wrong way and say, so you're saying that I'm not empathic, you're saying I'm not receptive to others' emotions? And no, I've seen people who have a defined emotional center who are actually very receptive to the emotional states of others. So I think we have to be careful here.
So has Nancy got a defined or undefined solar plexus?
I believe undefined. Let me. Oh no, wait. Sorry. I should have everybody's. I don't want to speak out of turn. And then I also see
Nancy
that.
is saying totally open, which means
Yeah,
no
that's what I thought.
potential there at all.
Yeah, that's what I also have. Yep. Yeah, Nancy only has in this whole solar plexus system, including all 14 gates of the system, 40 and 19, and nothing in the solar plexus itself. Yeah. And then,
Interesting.
yeah,
That's
that,
even more unpredictable. that's,
well,
that's
I
brilliant.
want to hear from Rachel in a moment, but I would also love to hear like how
So
are,
what I
but
would say
yeah.
is that uh, because my solar plexus is defined, it is my authority, and therefore there is certain guidance that we give to people with a defined solar plexus that they need to take time about making decisions. They tend to have a very distinct wave, and some people, in my case, can actually track that wave and follow it. And there are lots of things we could say that it helps to do journaling so that you can watch the movement of your wave, and then you can see how you felt about a particular idea a few days ago. And it can take months or years to make a true decision about a major issue in your life, about a job or a relationship or things like that, so that to really be willing to take lots and lots of time over things. That's what I'd
Hmm.
say about
That's a
the.
great, yeah, that's a great thing to tell people as well. I mean, we've been kind of talking about that in the overlay group, how important it is when you have a defined solar plexus not to feel rushed or have to, oh, I have to do it now or I'm not going to have a chance. I do want to hear from Rachel in just a moment, but first I just wanted to maybe drill down a little bit deeper in the undefined. So, unpredictable is unpredictable in the sense that my emotional state is unpredictable, or that the sometimes I'm very emotional, sometimes I'm not. I mean, how would you've known me for over a year now, Lucita. I mean, do you see me as a somewhat unpredictable emotionally person? Because I could also see how that might need to be qualified as well, in the sense that if I say someone's acting unpredictably, I almost mean erratically, like their emotions could be all over the place. And I don't experience myself that way. I experience myself as a very neutral, stable, sort of still emotional state. You maybe seen a different side of me, that sometimes you're expecting calm Jonah and you get nervous Jonah, or you're expecting one and you get the other. I don't know if you could
um,
comment on that.
Right, and there is some stuff in the chat now. So
Oh, yeah.
I actually don't think I know what's is going on for you, and you probably don't really know what's going on for me emotionally. I don't think we know each other well enough
Okay.
to
Fair
comment
enough.
on
Fair
the other
enough. Yeah.
person.
Fair enough. And also, I mean, I guess, yeah, I guess I'm just saying that, unpredictable can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person's going to have erratic unpredictability. It simply means that there's maybe surprising, I guess surprise is even one of the keynotes Ra uses for openness, surprise being the theme of the reflector, and that all openness sort of borrows from this keynote of surprise. We can be surprised there. We can be surprised. I can be surprised at the depth of how deeply I am touched by something where I didn't realize I had much going on at an emotional level at all. And then suddenly some transit happens, or some person is in my aura, or just something, I watch a certain film or who knows what, and it triggers an outpouring of emotion that surprises me because I didn't even realize it was there. Maybe that's the kind of thing as well. So I'd love to hear from Rachel, and I see that Rachel also had a comment that she thinks it's that people with open solar plexus experience solar plexus realities, including emotions, as unpredictable. That's an interesting way of reading it as well. That, yeah, that we may experience the emotions as something that's unpredictable and chaotic or something like that. Yeah, would you like to comment on that, Rachel, or anything else?
So when I try to explain to people who are really unfamiliar with human design and are not like interested in becoming a severe student of human design, like what it means to be defined in a center or open in a center, I use the term like where you have definition is actually like who you are really comfortable with identifying yourself as. It's like your wheelhouse where you feel like you've got it. It's what you've been granted and it's what you take for granted about yourself. It's like your strengths. And so you can be much more aware of your open centers and your weaknesses because they're unpredictable and they're unknown. Like my ajna and my throat, very comfortable for me to talk, very comfortable for me to talk about what I'm thinking about and to say what I think. If you have the not self theme of the open ajna is like wanting to be certain, I don't have that problem at all. Like so I feel like I have a lot of open other shit that I have big problems with. And when you taught the centers course, the not self theme of each of my open centers gave me severe like horror. Like I mean, like the whole like avoiding confrontation and truth as an open solar plexus person, I avoid it so hard I don't even like admit to myself that I avoid confrontation and truth. Like I mean, and if you have it as a definition, it's like you do it all the time without thinking about it. Like people that have defined solar plexus constantly like bringing up shit about my health to me and I'm like what I'm trying to avoid like confronting things like so I feel like familiarity and comfort with your this definition it's because it's like it's always on and it's always there versus the other is like it's going to be fluctuating, it's going to be changing, it's open, yeah, it's open to whatever versus it's defined, it's like it's clear, it's who it's set.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I guess also I will say that just because Ra describes the undefined solar plexus not self theme, avoiding confrontation and truth, is not a death sentence that we're going to be doing that, because I've actually had the thought that when the person with the undefined center does not live out that not self theme, but rather when we confront, that we actually have tremendous value for those who have a defined solar plexus. Because I've noticed, for instance, my father has a defined solar plexus. Yes, it's kind of true what you're saying, Rachel, that he might confront me about things, but a lot of times he doesn't actually notice what's going on with me at all. He's so wrapped up and absorbed in his own emotional process. He's an emotional generator. And Ross said that, the emotional generator is the least available person there is, that their availability is continually taken away by the downwave. And when the downwave is there, they're simply not available. They're just not able to respond. They're not able to participate. They're not able to interact and engage. And that was my experience growing up with my dad, was that he would be fully present and available and there, and then he'd be gone. And he would not be available at all to me. So I don't think it's that he's continually confronting me about the truths I can't face. In fact, I would say he actually, a lot of times, wouldn't confront me about anything. On the other hand, when I was able to overcome some of the not self themes of avoiding confrontation and truth, I started confronting him. And when I confronted him, it wasn't about you did this or you did that or anything. It was actually to help him. I remember one day he was very, very sad and very low on his wave, and I confronted him about it, and he actually opened up and actually started to process his emotions, and it actually resolved something in a very big way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the undefined centers with awareness, I do think we bring awareness to them, are able to sort of sample and test the defined centers. I've actually heard the completely open center, like Nancy has for her solar plexus and I have for my solar plexus, is even more like a reflector. This was a comment Ra made at one point. I mean, obviously it's different than having a reflector aura, but it's like a reflector in that it can truly sample the energy of the other. And I guess I'm just saying that I think that we all have roles to play, and one of the roles of the undefined centers can be to help those with the defined centers have a mirror. That my dad didn't realize he was in such a low until I confronted him about it. And if I avoided that confrontation, he never would have realized that. He would have just thought that's just the way life is. And I asked him how he's doing. Oh, I'm doing fine. But I could tell he wasn't doing fine. So there is this sort of ability to help those with the defined center from those with the undefined center. And of course, it goes both directions, because if I help him resolve something emotional, then it releases that, and it's much more enjoyable to be around him, and he's much more available to me. So it actually works both directions. Comment from now that you can have emotional outbursts and still be avoiding confrontation for the undefined solar plexus. Yeah, good point.
Now, do you want to talk about your experience about emotionality?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have completely open solar plexus. I have dormant 37, dormant 30, dormant 55. And two of those are in Saturn for me. So it's an interesting configuration for sure. I've found that for people with an undefined solar plexus, there's a kind of tenseness when they get emotional. It's hard to describe. It's not it's like it's foreign, or it's not natural for them, which is how it is for me. It's just like trying to speak a foreign language, getting emotional.
That's very interesting. I remember very early on in my studies, there was somebody who contacted me and said, I'm really an emotional person. Would you expect me to have a defined or an undefined solar plexus? So we did the chart. She had an undefined solar plexus. So it was one of my first examples of, like, you can't say in advance how the person is going to behave based on something that we don't know. Yeah, and I there was an incident where I spoke directly with Ra. It was online, and it was a meeting where Randy and him were talking about defined and undefined centers. And I said to Ra, all right, so how would, because I have a problem with my birth time. In England, they don't write it down. My mother said noon, but if I was born 11 minutes earlier, I would have an undefined solar plexus. So I said to Ra, please tell me what we would expect from a person with a defined solar plexus or an undefined solar plexus. And he said, you can't say that because people are so conditioned. So, and it's people's birthright to have their birth time. And he wouldn't give me any difference between the two. At that moment, I felt like giving up on human design, but I didn't, and I pursued things. But it was really interesting that he said that, and I think that's important. Actually, over time, I actually appreciated that he said that.
Yeah, yeah, I am totally feeling that. It's about what is. It's not about the way you present necessarily. It's an esoteric point about what's inherent to you. I mean, that's how I've always thought of it, but maybe that's too esoteric, not practical enough for the real world. But yeah, we don't want to be looking at someone who's very emotional and assuming like one way or the other, because people are, you know, if you want to call it conditioned or homogenized. Yeah, I mean, I understand it as, okay, are you consistently, do you have a consistent expression here? Do you express yourself this way around every single person? Or do some people, or do you amplify that with some people and you're completely neutral with other people?
Yeah, there's a few definitions. You mentioned Randy Richmond Jr., J.R. Lasita. He had a favorite way of describing it, which I don't want to assume that you might not like, but you might not like. He said that those with a defined solar plexus and the undefined solar plexus are the most obvious difference that you can immediately tell without even knowing human design, because those with the undefined solar plexus learn something once and get it immediately and remember it forever. And those with the defined solar plexus have to learn it 1,000 times. And you're continually shocked by the fact they forgot that. How could you possibly forget that? How could you possibly need to learn that lesson again? Didn't you learn your lesson? How could you possibly be, one day saying, I got it, I'm never going to do this again. 2 days later, they're doing it again. Or I completely got it, I'm never going to do this, I'm always going to do that. And then next week, they've completely forgotten and they're going exactly opposite to what they said. So he basically, and now he was undefined, so this is maybe not the most polite way to describe it, but he basically said people with defined solar plexus are so contradictory, they have to learn the same lesson at each point of their wave because they forget it as soon as their wave changes. Now, I disagree with him that it's obvious, but he certainly felt it was one of the most obvious things that you could spot a mile away. You didn't even need human design for. You could have a little kid say, why does this person need to learn this over and over again? Didn't they remember? Did they somehow forget? How did they forget? So that was his way of describing it, that they forget what they've learned. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's related also to my undefined G center, but Genoa can take me to the same place. And for me, it's a totally different experience every time he takes me on the hike or something.
It could be the emotional wave. You could be getting to experience. Yeah, I love that.
Right. I mean, the weather's going to be different. It's a different time of the year. I mean, I can see the same things and experience them as new, but I don't know if that's the same as what Randy was saying.
Well, yeah, and then a comment from Rachel. She's saying that's because of the cyclic nature of the solar plexus. I think it's because cyclic nature of the wave, but the wave colors things so fully. Like, here's an example. My dad defined solar plexus. I grew up very much noticing the difference between him and my mom, who's undefined, and myself, undefined. And one of the things I noticed was that my dad is a painter, and he's a very good painter. And then over and over again, many times, not just once, he would be painting and he would be deep in his work, and then he would destroy the painting. And then 3 days later, he'd be so sad. I'd say, why are you sad? Why are you sad? And he would say, I wanted to know what it looked like. Like, I want to know what that painting looked like. And he destroyed it before he had a chance for the wave to settle. He did it. He thought it was good. Then he goes, no, it's not good. It's terrible. And then he would literally put it in a trash can and burn it. He had a metal trash can. And I remember being a kid, seeing him burning his paintings. And he did this many, many times. It wasn't just once. I mean, this was a thing for him. And then I'm like, why didn't you learn your lesson the first time and just not do that the next time? Didn't you learn? But he would forget. I mean, I think of there was a famous glass artist who was a millionaire and had this amazing glass studio of millions of dollars of glass art. And his wife got a divorce, and he knew she was going to get half of it. So that same night, he took a sledgehammer and destroyed every piece of glass. He would rather do $2 million in damage and destroy his entire collection of art than allow her to have it. Now, that's maybe an example of a more vindictive defined solar plexus. But yeah, I do agree that we can't tell, but I'm also continually surprised at maybe just how lucky we get sometimes in figuring it out. My only real attempt to tell all 9 centers was very late one night, and I've told this story before, so I won't go into it in depth, but it was a very strange circumstance. I would never do this as a party trick. I have so much respect for human design as a deep mystical tradition that I would never do this again. But there was a man who was a friend of my friend, and he would not drop it all night long from 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Finally, it's midnight, and he's saying, look, if human design is real, and I even would tell him, I said, it's not up to me to say whether it's real or not. Experiment with it yourself. I'm not here to prove anything. And he just kept saying, if it's real, you should be able to tell me which centers I have defined and which I don't. Because he'd already heard from our mutual friend the difference in the defined and the undefined. And I asked him some questions. I said, okay, well, I'll need to ask you a few questions then. And I said, okay, do you ever feel like you have anything to prove? And he said, no, I never prove anything ever. And I said, okay, this man has an undefined ego. He's trying to prove to me that he doesn't, And then I said, do you ever this and this? And I asked him, and it was very short, maybe one question for each center. And then he entered his birth time, and sure enough, all 9 correct. He had a defined root, a defined sacral, a defined G center, and a defined spleen. And the interesting thing is, I thought that I might have had a better track record recognizing where I had openness, but that wasn't the case. I actually have 3 of the same 4 centers as him defined. So, I mean, I would never do that again. It's not a party trick. It's not something I want to do. But it was interesting that it is possible. It is possible to tell the difference. Or I could have just gotten really lucky. That would be. Yeah. The artist, the glass artist.
We would need to have a questionnaire like that for
Yeah.
hundreds of people before we could say it's a scientific conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting if you could scientifically validate through a test people do, and then they enter their birth time and it correlates between the answers. But again, like Ross said, it's very hard because we're all being so conditioned. And I remember when I first heard Ross say, the undefined solar plexus is wired cold. And I thought, this guy's crazy. I'm the warmest person I know. I'm always warm. I'm always hot. I don't feel a cold solar plexus. What is he talking about? And I think it was only when I understood what he meant by cold, which is the ability to let go of the emotionality and return to a certain neutrality, that I started to go, okay, I see this coldness now. I mean, I certainly don't feel like I'm a cold person, but that's not really what he meant. We have to really deconstruct what he says a lot, because it can be very cryptic and it can be hard to understand. I think people can get the wrong idea. If you just tell somebody on their first day learning about having an undefined solar plexus, you're cold, that's not going to help anyone. They're going to misunderstand that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Sirax. Yeah, you got it, Lisita. I wouldn't do it because it's not a party trick, And it's not something I even wanted to do then. It was something that ultimately was the path of least resistance that night to get this guy to stop. I think generators, I think a lot of the sacral response is the path of least resistance. People say, did you have a sacral response to that? And I was like, well, it was the yin flow. It was the flow of where things went, It was the water flowing and it led to that point. It wasn't like I was pushing against anything to go somewhere else. So and then now says she's.
I want to give one example of something interesting about my mother, because she had lied about her birth information. She said she was born in 1923. So until I was studying human design, I thought she was born February 13th, 1923. And then I did charts for the whole family, and I came to her and I said, you're the only person in the family who isn't emotionally defined. And she said, try the previous year. It was so amazing. And yes, of course, she was emotionally defined, but she must have felt that. And the other thing that's very interesting is she was born in the old city of Jerusalem. And she had told us that February 13th and Tu B'Shvat, the festival of the trees, was on the same day in the year that she was born. And that was true for 1922, but for 1923, it was a month apart. So.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and of course, there's the story that Locanand Diaz likes to tell, which is that when he first had his human design chart done, they had to actually send off an email to someone in Germany, or I don't know if it was Eric Mimmert or who at that point, but it was difficult to get a chart. And sure enough, he got it back, and it said he was a beer, not a doer. At that point, there were no types. It was simply whether you're here to kind of be existential or whether to take action and do. So he was trying to experiment with being a beer. And the way Alok put it is that he was struggling and struggling, waiting for something to happen and telling himself, I just need to wait, telling himself it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Finally, he's like running out of money. And in one weekend, he goes, this is it. There's no way I'm a beer. I just have to take action. I'm pushed to my absolute limit. So he gets on the phone and calls 27 or 28 different people. And he tells them all he's teaching human design. And if they give him a few $100, he'll do this weekend introduction. And suddenly they tell their friends, and it grows and grows. And he just has enough money for the whole year from like 2 weekends. And so he goes, wow, this doer just really worked. There's no way I'm a beer. So then he goes back to Ibiza 6 months later. He sees Ra. It's been a while. He he's been teaching human design, Ra's been teaching human design, and then Ra says, Alok, Alok, I have news for you. Wait a moment. And he runs into another room and he comes back with a new chart, shaking the piece of paper, and he says, You're a doer, not a beer. And Alok says, I know. And that was his answer, was that he'd figured it out on his own, that he knew there had to be a mistake because waiting did nothing for him and he was going to end up homeless on the street if he waited any longer. And then the moment he jumped on the phone and called a bunch of people, it all came together and it all worked. So he knew that he had to take action. He couldn't just wait for life to come to him. Yeah, the wait and seer versus the doer. Yeah, he thought he was a wait and seer. Exactly. And then just to answer Sirach's question, I think there's a way you can do it respectfully. I mean, I'm not going to do it at a party. I'm not really interested in doing that. But I think if you wanted to practice that, Sirach, that would be something very interesting for you to practice. And you could certainly see. I'm not really worried about sharing human design with people that aren't interested in birth time calculations. I mean, to me, the goal of human design is not to get it to as many people as possible. The goal of human design is to protect and preserve the wisdom from being destroyed. And the main people who destroy it are the ones who wouldn't be interested in anything doing with birth time calculations and the people that aren't really interested in it. So I actually am not one of these people who kind of is trying to get it as broad as possible. I'm more trying to keep it as tight as possible, within reason, not gatekeeping, but also making sure that people aren't just curious. I'm always skeptical of people who are merely curious. Yeah, preserving. So, and then Lasita says that she came into human design in 1995. That's such a beautiful time to have entered into this knowledge in that first wave, that first cohort. That's incredible. So we are all very lucky to have you here, and I love hearing your perspective on this, having seen it evolve and develop in so many ways. Okay, well, I guess any other defined, undefined solar plexus description? Should we move on to a different center?
Nifa came in since we started. And Sirach, we haven't heard about whether they have defined or undefined solar plexus.
Hanifa is a reflector, so she has an undefined solar plexus. Sirach has a questionable birth time as well, unless you have kind of narrowed that down. Sirach, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, wait, can you hear me at all?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, I'm pretty certain that my time is correct now. So I have an undefined solar plexus with hanging unconscious 37 and 22.
That definitely makes sense to me. Just a one side note, Ra talked about how the dormant design activations, so I guess what is true for both of yours, both your 37 and 22, he called those potentially the most uncomfortable activations in the body graph because it's in an undefined center and they're design side, they're unconscious. And so oftentimes when they do get activated, it feels like something is happening to us rather than that we have the agency to do something. It's kind of like, what's happening to me? How are you doing this to me, making me do this? It can kind of feel like, this part of you is kind of coming to life and it's like, oh, this again, this is being done to me.
There's something strange about the unconscious 22 though, because for me the way I experienced it is that I just like occasionally am just super cool to people. Like people just perceive me as really cool and or like I watch myself be very graceful in some way in some environment. I'm just like everything I do just works really well. I'm like, ah, cool. So it's not really. It's not. I find it's actually one of the more comfortable activations that I've been able to observe. I can't really track the 37 yet.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean that I think maybe the discomfort of the 22. I won't speak to whether it's personality or design side activation, but that can simply be the spike when it spikes because it has a spike lock mechanism. So I have hanging 12 or dormant 12. Basically, I know the 22 very well, and one thing I can say, having been in multi-year relationships with people with dormant 22 is that that spike lock can be so out of the blue that you can be going along having a perfectly normal, perfectly happy evening, and then the mood can shift on a dime by some trigger, who knows what, and suddenly it's just gone. It's like the rug is pulled out from under you. And I think that's the uncomfortable part, would be just that the mood can shift in a split second.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. That's yeah, that sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. Not that it's, uncomfortable to be graceful or to listen to people or to have social graces. It's not the kissing babies part. It's the mood shifting on a dime that can be so shocking. Yeah. But I do love that channel. I mean, that is such a great, it's actually my only access to electromagnetic activation of my completely open solar plexus. And I only have one hanging gate pointing at the solar plexus. So, well, one perspective to bring in is Steve Rhodes of Bantu. I know he's somewhat a controversial figure in human design, and maybe I'm not, I don't know. I've heard different things about him. I haven't really verified anything, so I'm not going to say anything on that in that regard. But I do know that he is somebody who has written a number of books, and also has a website where he talks about his own perspectives of the body graph, and the perspective he gives to defined and undefined is interesting. His perspective is that if it's defined, it means that you can just keep doing it forever and that you never don't have the energy for that. And if it's undefined, eventually you'll run out of energy. And he describes the channels in terms of these keynotes he's made for the centers. So, for instance, Lasita's channel, 659, channel of mating, which he describes that as being of service to feeling. That anything the sacral connects to is service, having the energy to serve something. And what is it serving? If it's connected to the spleen, it's serving success on the material plane. If it's connecting to the G center, it's serving love, that the G center is the center of love. But if it's connected to the solar plexus, as in this case, it's in service of feeling. And it's kind of an interesting way to look at that. He says that the root is endurance, for instance. And it's funny, I probably would have put endurance in gate 21 or, something like that. But he qualifies it by saying that the endurance of the root is about trying and failing and trying again and being able to just persevere and to keep going no matter how many times you fail, to just keep struggling for it. Of course, 2838 is the channel of struggle, so there's some precedence for his description. So if you have a defined root, what is it connected to? That's what you can struggle for. So it's a really interesting perspective, right? It's like, what do you have energy to struggle for? If you don't have a defined root, you can try to struggle, but eventually the program pulls the plug and you just don't have the energy and you just give up, is the idea. If you don't have a defined sacral and you're trying to serve people and be of service to them, eventually you're going to run out of energy to serve them. It's not about responding to them and serving for them. Now, the interesting way that he describes it, though, is he says it doesn't mean you can't do these things. You can absolutely do all of them. In fact, the reflector gets to do them even more than anyone else because they're not really beholden to their defined centers. It's more that you can't continue doing them continuously. So as a reflector, Hanifa can struggle quite a bit for something. But can she struggle 365 days a year, year after year, decade after decade? According to Rhodes, no. You might disagree, Hanifa, and I'd be curious to hear of your experience of that. But the idea is really just that you can do any of the centers, but only so far. I can share, but after a while, I just get tired of sharing. I can't share anymore. I'm burned out. I have an undefined throat. I'm not able to share consistently.
I think the beauty of the transit is that you don't have to deal with all of the undefined centers at the same time at any one time.
Yeah.
It just feels like there's always relief in some area of life.
Yeah, there's always something you don't have to do, which is nice, even though you have to do a lot of things. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, I share a lot. I mean, I'm sharing in these videos, but I also, after I do these Zooms and after I share a lot, I kind of lose the energy and I'm like, I don't have the energy to share at all. I completely run out of steam. But I still have consistent energy to be of service to what I love. Sacral to G center. I'm serving what I love. Now has 3 life force energy channels to serve what she loves. Like, that is a consistent day in, day out, always having that energy available to just keep going, serving what you love. I also have the root to the sacral. So I have consistent energy to have endurance and to endure a lot of hardship and trying and failing and trying again to be of service. If I try serving one way and it doesn't work, I fail, I try again to serve another way. I don't give up trying to be of service. Being of service is kind of my thing. However, I don't have a defined spleen. No matter how hard I try to struggle for material success, eventually I will give up. I don't have a defined solar plexus. No matter how hard I struggle and I try to struggle and I try to endure for feeling, I just can't justify that. Feeling is not as charged for me as service. If I can be of service to people, that's something I can put a lot of energy into. And and then Rachel says the best thing she ever heard me say is that I get energy we get energy when we do our definition. I like that. Yeah, it's like you can tell I've been sharing all day, tired. The moment I serve what I love, energized. So yeah, Rachel's saying you feel better, look better, more vital when you do your definition. Exactly. I've been talking all day, sharing all day, undefined throat. I look tired, I feel tired, I am tired, I need to rest. I could be of service to what I love all day long, be full of energy. So that's another way to kind of look at that. But if I'm trying to be of service to material success, well, I have an undefined spleen. That's going to wear me out. Yes, Rachel.
So how do you like feel like so you're being of service to human design right now by doing this. So it's kind of like it's hard sometimes to tell like I get it though, but you're doing a lot of talking with the open throat and it is exhausting. I understand that completely. So it's like how do you know like I guess
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
doesn't
To
always overlap.
categorize which one, I see what you're saying. How do we know, like which centers am I using right now?
Well, no, actually, it's like because I do think it's always overlapping. I don't think I can ever show up with only my definition. I mean, unless I'm like a disembodied or something, you know what I mean? But so it's like, how do you know when you're doing the thing, like that you're leaning too hard on your undefined centers and like to like, this is just a rhetorical question. I'm not like really expecting an answer, but it's just like, how do we know when we're being more not self and when we need to like get back into our definition? I guess it's a little bit different for each of us. That's what the signal will
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, but I do think we can kind of recognize general areas. Like when I was stock trading, I was getting kind of exhausted because I was trying so hard for material success and it was so splenic and I would get kind of burned out. Like I would do really well, but then I would just be like so fried after. I would be like shaking after because it was such a splenic thing. It was such a like push the button at the right time to buy, to sell. I mean, I was doing like day trading and swing trading and stuff like that. And it was very like stressful. And, I have a defined route. I can handle stress. But what my defined route is designed for is handling the stress of trying and failing and trying again to be of service, not necessarily trying and failing and trying again to succeed in the material plane. Similarly, for the solar plexus, I felt so exhausted after a big emotional processing day where I'm like, I just cannot process emotions anymore. I'm going to catch a cold if I keep processing these emotions. Like, I can watch a beautiful movie and cry and be touched and feel the emotion and it feels great. But if I spend like multiple days in a deep emotional conversation with like a romantic partner or something, I feel like I'm going to catch a cold by day 2 or 3 because all of my energy has gone to the solar plexus and I start to like look older and look more exhausted and look drained and lose my vitality. So, I mean, when I think of like sacral to G and like doing what I love and being of service to what I love, I love massage. Not everyone knows that about me, but I'm a masseuse. I do trigger point therapy. If I really am enjoying doing trigger point therapy, I'm more energized by the end of that massage. There's no real sharing component happening there. I don't have to think about it. If I spend all day solving problems in computer programming, I'm exhausted. That's head, ajna, throat. You know, it's like I'm having to solve and come up with solutions and know things, and by the end of it, I'm like totally drained. So again, it's not that I can't do that. I just, it exhausts me. It drains my energy. Using the life force energy, I gain energy. And then, yeah, now says she swears she gave herself a fever once doing that. On the topic of massage, also, if it's emotional, it's much more exhausting, right? Because it goes into the solar plexus. And what's funny is this is a slight Ra story, famously did not want to be massaged or did not like massage, but he had a student, Dietrich, who was a massage therapist, and she kept offering to give him a massage. And she told this story, and he used to call her Earth Mother because she had gate 27, I guess it was. But anyway, it was kind of her nickname, this caring mother figure and so on. So she kept offering to give him a massage, and finally he said, okay. And so she gave him a massage, and then the very next day, he showed up and he was missing a tooth, and he showed her the tooth and said, "This is why I don't get massaged." And he had thought that basically the massage had taken all of his energy away from the spleen, where it was like defending his body, over to his solar plexus, and then that's when he lost his tooth. Yeah. So yeah, and I was once in a room. This was during COVID, and I noticed it was a very emotional talk, and I just said, these people are going to get COVID, they're just listening to a very emotional talk. Some of them are crying. So I left. I didn't want to get COVID. And sure enough, 25 people in that room got COVID. This was for a local kind of teen group where the teenagers were talking about very heavy topics for them, and a lot of people were crying, and there was a woman on stage talking about her trauma, and she was crying, and people in the audience were crying. And I just looked around. I thought, these people are all going to get COVID. And I left, and sure enough, I didn't. Yes, it is 26 that is associated with T cells. Absolutely no. But yeah, it's almost like the energy has to go somewhere, and it can either be in the spleen fighting off things in our immune system, or it can be in the solar plexus, but it can't be in both. And when we're doing a lot of emotional processing, we're more susceptible to disease. In fact, this is why Ross said STDs are so rampant, because people don't wait for emotional clarity before having sex. And that it's much more likely to transmit an STD if somebody's at an emotional high, because all their emotional energy, the lack of clarity and the chaos and so on being in the emotional system, isn't defending the body against disease. So, another interesting nuance of it. All right. Well, any comments on life force energy? Defined, undefined centers, anything at all? Anyone have any comments on? I guess I see one from Rachel that she gets a migraine after emotional processing. Yeah, I do think it can. It's like we're spending energy versus gaining energy, and both are important. It's just in breath, out breath. We can't go through life not spending energy. It's just I revitalize myself being in service of what I love. Even just following my G center sometimes, going for a walk and letting it take me somewhere, and my sacral is using energy following my G center and taking me to different places. I feel so energized after. If I'm in a new city, or even here in Santa Fe, just following wherever my feet take me, afterwards I come back and I feel so satisfied and so full of energy, compared to if I spent all day trying to solve things with my undefined head and ajna. Nancy says, massage? She likes massage, but after it, she can't be in concentrated, struggling service. Yeah, I have Nancy's body graph here from earlier. So she's using some of the keynotes that we were just talking about, the 952 concentration, which I also have, and then the 2838. And yeah, struggling for success, struggling to be of service, knowing and sharing what she knows. Those are the things that energize her. that give her the life force energy. All right. Well, any final comments? Anything anyone wants to discuss or chat about? Otherwise, we can wrap up a little early today. But I appreciate everyone coming. This was a fun topic. If there are recommendations for future topics as well, I am absolutely open to hearing them, and I would love to continue exploring. I'm thinking of starting another weekly. I'm probably going to use it for open radio, but there's a bunch of non-human design topics I want to cover. So I do want to save this for our human design weekly, but I am interested in going into some of the other mystical areas and things like that. And so I may...
Have you studied the Godheads?
That would be a great topic, Lisita. That would be wonderful. If we have, it's been a long time. So
Okay.
that would be pretty fun. Yeah. Okay. Well, I love that. Maybe we can do Godheads next week. That would be really cool. I would enjoy that. Thank you. And then Nancy says she wonders about the throat center. She prefers less talking, but does see the undefined throat having more energy for speaking. The way I put it is that the undefined centers are where we bring awareness. And so because I have an undefined throat, now has an undefined throat, we bring a lot of awareness to communication. And the awareness that, and so does Hanifa. She was actually just saying earlier, it was just in our previous class on personality, how aware she was of where the communication was going and how communication moved, and she was demonstrating, a lot of awareness about that. So yeah, a lot of positivity around the Godheads. Let's do it. That sounds great. I think that'll be a good intro next week. And I'll see if I can crib any notes from James Alexander, because he's been doing a year-long class series on the Rave Mandala. And he's been doing a lot of deep study of the Godheads. And he's been telling me all sorts of interesting Godhead things. So definitely a lot there. Yeah. Jesus here, what can I say? Hades for Hanifa. Rachel and now are Parvati. Yeah, that would be wonderful. I would love to. Rachel's comment, Jesus flex. Yeah, just Jesus, no big deal. You might have heard of him. Anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, let's do Godheads next week. Great suggestion, Lisita, and I'm looking forward to it. And then 8 days from now, overlay in the park. I'll message as a reminder and stuff like that. So, okay. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye.